You may know the film, The Truman Show. And is it called The Truman Show? Anyway, it's Truman. And it's been on loads of times. In fact, I noticed it was on this last week on one of the many channels that we access. That's right, The Truman Show. And I feel I can give part of the story away, at least. It's, if you're not familiar with the film, it's where this guy called Truman, how from birth his life is filmed. And it's set as a kind of a soap drama. The only thing is, he doesn't know he's being filmed live, 24/7, because there's all these cameras which are very cleverly hidden. And everybody else in his life are actors, and he doesn't know. And it's set in this gigantic studio, and he doesn't realise, because the studio is well, it's enormous, several miles in terms of its radius. And as he grows older, he senses something's not right. Well, I suppose you would, wouldn't you? But remember, he knows no other. And he has this obsession with wanting to travel to the Fiji Islands. But every time he goes to book for this particular holiday to try and, travel as far away as possible, obstacles are always put in his way. And he senses, although he can never sort of quite understand it, but he senses that he wants to be free. He wants to be free, but free from what? Free from what? In essence, he's being held captive, is Truman. Captive against his will, but he doesn't know it until the end. And it's quite a startling end to the film. And I think, in a way, it's an insight into human nature, because you can go through life sensing, deep down, that something is not quite right, that there must be more to life. I think it's ironic in our society, in our Western society, that which is based on freedom, that people long to be truly free. And in previous generations, the emphasis, I think, in society, particularly in our society, was on being a good person. For example, in the Victorian age, the emphasis was, it was on morality. That was a strong theme. It was all about living that good life. Whereas today, I think, the emphasis is more on freedom, being a free person. And, it is we absorb, don't we, from the media, from peer pressure, all sorts of messages and vibes that suggests we're not truly free until we've purchased this item, or we've experienced that, or we've visited that particular place, or done this, or seen the latest, whatever it is. And then we find that actually, whatever that experience was, it's never truly fulfilling, is it? It's never truly, at least in the long term, satisfying. And it seems to me, as I read God's word, that if you're pinning your hopes on something other than God at the centre of your life, the centre of your worship, if you're pinning your hopes on something else, which of course is ultimately idolatry, then you'll always feel enslaved. You'll always feel unhappy. And what makes it worse is that for many people, they don't really know why they feel like that. They're always wanting the next, whatever it is, experience. So do you see the point? The truth is, to be free to do whatever you want, and you do it, whatever it is, in the end makes you a slave to your freedom. Because true happiness is always elusive. Two main points I want to make today. And then, start thinking about the questions you may want to ask or talk with somebody else towards the end. But the first point is this. You and I, as human beings, you are held captive by the cords of death. You're held captive by the cords of death. We read in Hebrews, Hebrews chapter 2, verse 15, about how all our lives, all your life, you're held in slavery by your fear of death. And I think that is, in different ways, that is very true. For example, some people, they need to exploit their freedom because they know it's not going to last, that one day they're going to die. And so they kind of exploit the freedom that they have. And whilst I suggested earlier, people in previous generations sought to live a good life, to be moral, as if religion could get them through death into heaven. And whilst we know, because we've talked about it many times since we started as Gateway Church, whilst we know religion, well, it can't bring people into heaven. Don't think your religion, can get you into heaven. But at least those people of that particular view, at least there is a sense of, yes, there is an afterlife. There is a life to come and a sense of accountability. Today, there is an increasing view that this life is all there is. Do you think so? For some people, they think this like this, and so they live as if this life is all there is. I went to a football match yesterday. I won't tell you exactly who and where, but some people were living, you could tell by their behaviour, their conduct, as if that was it. Yesterday was their last day on earth. And so, the motto is, take life easy, eat, drink and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And people live out their freedom as if there's no tomorrow. And it can be a freedom which is very hedonistic. And it's the attitude of, well, why is life worth living if in the end you die? Why is life worth living if in the end you die? So I may as well just live my life how I want, because in the end I die. You see? So either way, whether it's the religious life or you could say the hedonistic life, death is a very powerful influence, and it hangs over people. And so if you're trying to live a moral life, you're trying to live to please God, with a view of trying to get into heaven, it's because death is a determining factor. Death is coming, and you somehow need to meet that grade before death arrives. Of course, that's a lie. You can never be good enough for God. That's the lie of religion. If, on the other hand, you're living your life with no reference to morality and to God, and of course that's the lie of atheism, again, death is the determining factor. And what you need is, whichever sort of, you could say, category you're in, you need freedom. You need to be set free from those chains. To be free of the shackles. That's it, to be free of the shackles. To be free of the fear of death. Because that's the driver in your life, whichever kind of way you fall down, whichever side you fall into. Whether it's towards morality, it's death, that's the driver. Or whether it's immorality, it's death. The prospect of death, which is the driver. Whether you're living towards religion or paganism. But here, in Hebrews chapter 2, it tells us some good news. And indeed, the writer, we don't know who the writer is, he says very clearly in verse 15 that we're held in slavery by our fear of death. People are scared to death of death. They are. People are scared to death of death, and that finality hangs over you. It's like a stranglehold, isn't it? Sometimes I get my little in a stranglehold. Playing, of course. But sin is like that. Death, the devil. It's a stranglehold that you can't get out of. You can't free yourself of. And to compound it, this kind of reality is it's manifested in all sorts of ways in your daily life. And let me give some examples. It might be on a global scale. Think of Syria. The country called Syria. And today, terrible things are taking place. It's a terrible, terrible war. And thousands of people have had their freedom taken away to live a normal life that we experience of peace and harmony. They're captive against their will. It might be on you could say, a national scale. We think of the financial crisis, don't we? Which causes all sorts of major issues in our society. And many people, we see it on a Thursday at the food bank. Many people are, in a way, at the mercy of these austerity measures. And people feel captive. They feel hemmed in. I spoke to one guy who turned up completely hemmed in by his financial situation and trying to find a way out. It might be, here's another example of being held captive, addictions. I mean, we have all sorts of addictions, don't we, in our society? High levels, whether it's drugs or gambling or alcohol or pornography. These and other examples, they impact our society in a very negative way. Might be on a personal level. It might be broken marriages, broken family life, and people feel captive to the guilt. That's another type of sort of sense of being shackled. And the trauma that broken relationships bring. And then we have the problems of health, don't we? Sickness, disease, and people in a different way experience being held in slavery, you could put it, due to health issues, being held captive. It might be, on this Mother's Day, it might be that you're trying to prove yourself to somebody, to others. That you've always felt under pressure, under relentless pressure, to be that perfect mother, or to be that perfect son or daughter, in order to gain approval. And in that sense, you're held captive. You see, there's different ways it manifests itself. But here's the second point, and here's the good news. It's like last week, bad news first, and we've got to get the bad news to get the good news. And the good news is this, that yes, we're held captive by the cords of death, but you can be set free by the crucified Christ. You can be set free. And, I mean, do tell me if you can think, if you know of a better alternative, if you know of a more credible alternative to this truth, that Christ crucified can set you free. And it's this: God sent his son Jesus into our world from heaven. Has anybody watched Mission Impossible, the film? And you think, he ain't going to do it. That is Mission Impossible. And that was Jesus. It was the Mission Impossible. But he came into the world and on a rescue mission. And as verse 14 says of Hebrews 2, Jesus, the Son of God, became one of us. He became human. What you experience, he's experienced. God can identify with you because he became fully human. So that, here we are, that he might destroy him who holds the power of death. That's the devil. And free those, verse 15, who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. And notice in the last verse, verse 18, Jesus can help you with all the temptations you face. That you face every day. That could actually send you spiraling back into the slavery of sin and its demonic influences. It might be that today you are a new Christian. And, there's those, you might be have struggled in the past with addictions or debt or anger or sexual immorality or violence, whatever else it may be. Remember, God can help you by his Holy Spirit. He can help you to resist these temptations as they rise up, no doubt as they will, with the support of other Christians. That's why we need each other. That's why church is so important. And as I sometimes say, when you don't feel like going to Gateway, and sometimes we're like that, when you don't feel like going to Gateway, that's when you need to go. That's when you really need to go to Gateway, when you don't feel like it. Because we need each other. So God sent Jesus to set you free. And he destroys that stranglehold. That's it. Jesus destroys the stranglehold of sin and death and the work of the devil. How does it work? Well, let me tell you, because the Bible explains further about this freedom Let the Bible interpret the Bible. For example, we read in Mark chapter 10. Jesus says, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." Jesus gives his life as a ransom. Now think of the word ransom. What kind of picture does it bring to mind? What would you say?
Kidnapping.
Kidnapping, right. That's a good start. Imagine someone being kidnapped, and the idea of how it works is that person is held and there's a ransom. And that ransom has to be paid. And when that ransom is paid, that person is set free. And Jesus' death was a ransom to decisively end your captivity and set you free. Free from being in that hold of sin and free from the fear of death. So it's this picture, isn't it? It's an analogy. Here's another image, redemption. And it goes back to the first century, in the time of Jesus and the apostles. If you were a slave, and very possibly you would have been a slave in the first century, the Roman Empire, which was built upon slavery, perhaps a bit different from what you may envisage slavery being, but nevertheless you would have been a commodity. You would have been a commodity. And you may have been well treated with privileges, with responsibilities, but you were regarded by your owner as property. To be granted freedom and the dignity of personhood, you would have to buy your freedom. Or perhaps somebody else was able to buy it for you. Redeemed. So let's say Barnsley Market, okay, first century, you go along and there's the butchers and the bakers and the candlestick makers, but there's this arena where there are some slaves and they're being sold off. And of course, the better looking you were, there you are in Barnsley Market, the better looking you were, or perhaps the better set of skills you had, the higher the price, and you'd be sold on. Perhaps the owner may be hard up and would have to sell you. You'd have no choice. You would have no choice. But now and again, and it did happen, but it was fairly unusual, somebody, or if you were able to actually save up, if it was possible, usually somebody else would redeem you and set you free. And so you could walk out of Barnsley Market not being held captive to somebody, but free. That's redemption. Jesus sets you free. He bought you with a price. He foots the bill. You don't have to pay a penny. That's good news. And Jesus dies that you might be redeemed. As it says in 1 Peter, it's not with perishable things such as silver and gold that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your forefathers, but with the precious blood of Christ. A lamb, there's the picture of a lamb, sacrifice, without blemish or defect. And so, as I begin to draw to a close, listen, Jesus went to the cross and he had committed no sin. He was innocent. But he became a prisoner for you. You who had committed sin. And that's it. He was held as a prisoner, and he was convicted of a crime that he'd never done. He never committed anything. But the crime was, of course, there was that statement above his head on the cross, the statement of his crime, the written charge, which said, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Of course, the religious people were very cross about this, that Pilate had put that. They said, no, right, that this man claimed to be the King of the Jews. But Pilate said, no, what I've written, I've written. Indeed, what took place on the cross is what Martin Luther called the great transaction. Or another way to look at it is this, that God as King has pardoned you. He's pardoned you. He set you free from the shackles of sin, and now he invites you into the palace. He invites you into the palace. You're delivered from those chains of sin and delivered into fellowship with God. Let me finish with talking about a group of people who were held in slavery, physically shackled. And of course, they were the black African slaves in America, as well as in other parts of the world. But those particular groups of slaves, of course, in centuries gone by now, they would shuffle along in their shackles, singing Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, coming for to carry me home. Of course, that's now adopted as a rugby anthem, isn't it? But I guess you don't often hear the rest of those words to that spiritual song. They go like this. I won't sing it, don't worry. But it goes like this. I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? A band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home. If you get there before I do, tell all my friends I'm coming too. Coming for to carry me home. I'm sometimes up and I'm sometimes down, but still my soul feels heavenly bound. Coming for to carry me home. The brightest day that I can say, when Jesus washed my sins away. Coming for to carry me home. And they'd sing this as they would shuffle along the path with their shackles on, their chains, or perhaps working in the fields. A song of hope. A song of hope in the midst of trouble. It might be that in your life it's full of trouble, but there is actually hope. And that is a song, of course, of faith in Jesus, who came into the world to save sinners, to rescue you and I. And that's good news. Jesus died as a prisoner instead of you. He set you free from the shackles, as verse 15 says of chapter 2. By his death he might destroy him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those all their lives who have been held in slavery by their fear of death. What about you? And in this short 1-minute interval, just have a think before we go into Q&As. Do you believe, have you experienced in your own heart and life that freedom which Christ brings? Okay, so perhaps have a think, maybe by yourself, or chat to your neighbour, or it might be you want to form a question that you'd like to ask, and we'll see how we can respond to that. So just a quick minute, and then we'll move into 10 minutes of Q&As before we sing.